Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much. Just to give you a little more background, I've got 39 years, 38 years of its acquisition, and 1 year in this new role, so you'll have to bear with me as I'm going through a learning curve. Oops, too fast. As Andrea pointed out, I was responsible for working with a team of folks. It wasn't a one-person operations by any means. But in Region 10, which is the Auburn GSA office, we were originally responsible for 7 scheduled programs known as the services, professional services. And GSA, as you know, the FAS is starting to move into a transitionary period where we're moving more towards category management. And so when our regional commissioner brought this to our attention and the concept, it was fairly easy for us to jump on board having so many programs because, quite honestly, from a contracting perspective, we looked at it as this is a great way to eliminate some work, right? Because we're going to go from 7 programs to 1. And I don't know that that's necessarily what happened initially for us in our first year, but that is our ultimate goal for you, our customer. And so we started working on this in, as I said, 2014, officially in October of 2014, with a goal of standing up 1 solicitation and 1 program on September 30th or October 1st, 2015. And with the team that we had working, it came to fruition. The benefits of our schedule, just to start us off, it's a one-stop schedule. This is the place where you're going to come if you have multiple requirements. Instead of having to split up your requirements and do separate requisitions, our program now will allow you to do it under 1 RFQ. As I said, we established it in 2015, and while your customers, it's not uncommon for us to get calls going, where can I look at all the clauses? Where's the solicitation? So I always include this regardless of whether we're training customers or our industry partners so that you have a spot of where the solicitation and what the number is. And as I said, it resulted from us consolidating 7 programs. So what were the schedules that were affected? You're going to know many of them by their acronym names. And we still advertise them by their acronym names because we didn't want to cut anybody off cold turkey, because you guys have known some of these names for a very long time. But instead of schedules, they're now identified as suites under the professional services schedule. Some of them you'll recognize. We had Schedule 541, the advertising schedule, or commonly referred to as AIMS. We had the financial 520, which is also known as FABS. We had 738-2 language, which is just that, language services. Our 871, which was our professional service, our engineering services, also known as PES. Of course, the big one, MOBIS 874. Our log world, or 874-5 schedule. And finally, our 899 environmental services schedule. So just to give you some background, it took us a year to do this, and it included moving 4,500 plus contracts. So the consolidation of the programs themselves was fairly simple. I wanted to put this in a way where y'all, these are the kind of questions, so it's kind of an interactive slide presentation in the sense of these are the common questions that I get. Although I serve as the industry liaison for GSA, having had so many years in acquisition and dealing with a lot of our agency customers throughout that time, regardless of which program I worked in, I have a pretty common name out there, so I get a lot of phone calls. And the biggest one I probably got was, so what's the difference between these two? Well, as I mentioned earlier, under the single schedules, if you had a requirement for, say, MOBIS and some IT work, some logistics, you would have to determine what you were going to do. And oftentimes it resulted in the issuance of more than 1 request for quote. Our concept was to create, as I mentioned, a single source for you to come to. Doesn't mean you have to go out and procure any or all of these. You can come in still for just your MOBIS suite. Or if you have a consolidated request, you can come in using the schedule. So in looking at that, I'm sorry, I'm just terrible with this. We went in, and common ground for us is the SINs. So we didn't want to transition and create this sudden turmoil of where did MOBIS go? And I use MOBIS because MOBIS is the most common schedule that we own that is known to all of you. I still have to see MOBIS, and I know the SINs. I always ordered 874-1 consulting services. I can't find it. We spent the year moving our contractors, and in doing so, it involved the contractors who only had, say, a MOBIS schedule. They moved over easily through a modification. The complexity lied in the fact of the contractors who held more than one contract. How are we going to move them over? And that was a little more cumbersome in the fact that we had two or more contracts that we had to meld into one. But our ultimate goal was always to keep the SINs looking the way that you saw them in their individual schedules. If you were to go into our portal page or into the solicitation itself, today you would see the same SINs you've always seen. Now that wasn't necessarily the case because we did have a transitionary period there between October 1st and I think about January, February, when we finally were able to actually only have one set of SINs. But this is what you're going to see. If you go to our portal page, which we have our new portal page, the PSS portal page, you'll find all kinds of resources, and one of them being a SIN table. So you don't have to go to the solicitation. When you go to the SIN table, you'll find every SIN, and this is how they're going to show up. It's going to show its old original program code of 520, or now what we call a suite code, along with the PSC code, product service code, followed by the SIN, the narrative, the NAICS, and the size that represent each of those NAICS. So I encourage you all, if you do work in the professional service arena, please take a moment and make this one of your bookmark pages because there's a lot of good information there. We're in the process of kind of making it a little more user-friendly and not so government-oriented. When you go to our government sites, they tend to say, you know, solicitation, blah, blah, blah. We're trying to make it a little more, you know, where do I find kind of a concept. So there'll be some changes to it. But right now, we have links, resources for our contractors and resources for our customers. And we populate information all the time into these, whether it's information related to our training that we have coming up, changes to our program. This is where you're going to find everything that's specific to the professional services program itself. So as we were consolidating, as I mentioned, we had a program that was not a very big program called the Consolidated. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. When the Consolidated program was created back in the late 90s, the concept was that it too would serve as a total solution. But it was a total solution based on every schedule GSA, FAS was responsible for. And it didn't do very well, and primarily because we were relying on the product service codes to represent the SINs. For us in our world, it looked great and it sounded great, but for you, the customer, if you had an environmental need, let's say a specific environmental need, I'll just say remediation, and you went to the product service code, you would get every contractor that ever bid on environmental. And 80% of them were not involved in the remediation field. So what we did was we complicated your life rather than made it easier. So in 2011, the project was just kind of winding down, didn't really have a life of its own, and they gave it to me. And I didn't understand it. So the first thing I did was I went in and I mirrored up the SINs so they would look like the single schedules. Everybody thought, oh, this is great, it's great customer support. I have to be really honest, no, it was all about Kathy. I needed to be able to understand the program I was supposed to be responsible for. So when we decided to transition over to the professional services schedule, then we began to look at, if we're truly going to offer a total solution, we're going to have to take our consolidated program. We're going to have to remove the services that no longer fall under our category. So that meant eliminating your O3 FAC, your IT, your HR schedule, and we had to take those away. In doing so, prior to that, we took a look at what were the volume of sales, and then we met with some of our industry partners to find out what are these sales tied to. And more often than not, we found that we had schedules or SINs within other schedules that would not be a part of our program that were really a necessity to allow an agency to obtain a total solution. And so in our research, we found specifically 6. There was the IT SIN, SIN 13251, which if you've ever done any IT work under the schedules, you're very familiar with that SIN. We also found one of our HR SINs, 59521, and then we found 4 energy management SINs. These SINs were used in concert primarily with MOBIS or environmental or professional engineering services. So if we took those out of the equation, we were no longer offering a total solution within the vision that we had created. So we met with each one of the acquisition centers that are responsible for these programs, and through that concept and those meetings, we were able to borrow, for lack of a better way to put it, these 6 SINs. And we refer to them as complementary SINs. So if you go into our program or into the solicitation itself, what you're going to see when you view these SINs is an alpha C in front of them. C representing complementary. Why are they complementary and what does that mean? Well, in a nutshell, it's going to allow you to get a total solution, but it's not going to allow you to obtain these services as standalone. That's the difference. Basically, what's going to happen, these SINs, all these SINs, so that industry is aware of it, all of these SINs have a statement at the bottom of their scope stating that the SIN cannot be used for standalone services, because our intent was not to conquer the world of schedules. Our intent was simply to use these SINs in order to provide our customer the ability to truly obtain a total solution if they needed what we viewed as very popular SINs that fit within our category of professional services. These are the 6 SINs. If you go again to our portal page, you would find either in the SIN table or the solicitation, or even down the side when you look at the suite of services that are provided, you'll see reference made to these. That's strictly what they are, is ancillary to be used as part of a total requirement that you may have. So how do they work? So if you had a requirement for MOBIS, say MOBIS Consulting, and you wanted them through the consultation to create some kind of a program that would allow you to follow and track operations or money in, money out, what would you do? Well, that's where the IT piece is going to come in. What we found is that agencies would either go to the IT schedule and they would solicit under IT, but they really needed that MOBIS front-end work to get to that back end, or they would come in under MOBIS and they would slide it in. And what would happen is our industry contractors, when we would go out and meet with them through our industrial operations analyst visits or IOA visits, they would get nailed for having services that were, quote, out of scope. So it just wasn't working. And by bringing these in, it now allows a win-win situation, not only for you as our customer to get that total solution, but for our industry partner to be able to offer that total solution and not worry about somebody coming in and going, nah, you can't do that. How it doesn't work, as I mentioned, you can't use it as a standalone. So if an agency had a requirement for just IT work, professional IT services, you couldn't even come in under the PSS schedule and see all the firms. If you were to go into GSA Advantage and do a search of contractors under 13251, you're going to get just a huge, vast number of contractors. If you go in under PSS and you query C13251, it's a much smaller list. The reason being is because there's a firewall so that we don't take away from the IT schedule or the O3 FAC or HR schedule. These can only be used as complementary. And this is, I'm spending a little more time on this because this is a really new concept. We've had industry partners come in and saying, hey, I've got an IT schedule, I want to be on PSS, because it's the big buzzword right now, but they can't because that's the only service they provide. And we've had customers coming in going, well, I want IT, but I want to use your PSS schedule. You can't, because you're not going to find the contractors you're used to seeing for large scale buys, because they're not there, because unless they provide professional service, what are deemed professional services under the professional service category, meaning MOBIS, PES, language, environmental, engineering, they're not going to show up. So it's really important, because this was the only way we could offer that total solution to our customers. So another question I'm often asked, since we transitioned, because that all came into play October 1st, 2015. So this is still fairly new. It's still in its infancy. What about those single schedules? Can I still see them out there? You know, the single contractors who only had one schedule, yes, because nothing happened other than on October 1st, they received a mass modification that told them, you're no longer MOBIS, or you're no longer environmental, you are now a professional services schedule contract holder. Nothing else changed. For our contractors who held multiple contract numbers, their single contracts, we've retained some of them due to BPAs. But anybody who had a task or only had task order work, no, we did not. They went on and they migrated and now have a single contract that houses those multiple programs they had. So that's pretty much how that all worked. Now, because we consolidated, this is a really big question I get asked is, so you now have this list of all these SINs. As a contractor, can they provide all those SINs because you changed them from a MOBIS contractor to a PSS? The answer is no, they cannot. It's no different than before. They can only provide the services that have been awarded to their contract. So as you, the customer, when you're going out and you're researching these contractors and you're talking to them and they say, you know, now that we're PSS, oh yeah, I can give you MOBIS. No, they can't unless they have the MOBIS SINs and those specific services that you're wanting under their contract. So, you know, again, because it's new, I encourage you that as you go through and if you're using the PSS schedule or parts of it because you were a MOBIS user, it's okay to ask the contractor, especially when they come up and they're saying, we're PSS now, it's all good. It is all good, but they still have to come in and they have to modify to now add. And it's new for them too. It's not that they're trying to pull anything, it's just it's a whole new concept. And so when you throw all these SINs at, whether it's a customer or industry, it's like, great, they're all available. And they are available, but it's still through the standardized process of modification and adding, or initial submission of offer and awarding. So what does it look like in eLibrary? I can't show you here because we don't have the internet set up where I could share with you. We've got a booth set up out there and I would be happy to go through it just to give you an idea. It's in eLibrary, the search function. Before, if you went in, and even now, if you go in under 874, MOBIS, right? In the past, it would show you all the MOBIS SINs, etc. Now it's going to just show you a piece, because keep in mind, these are now suites under the PSS. If you're wanting to see everything that's available through eLibrary, your best bet is to search by the program number, which is 00 Corp. It doesn't mean you're not going to find what you want looking through just the 874 or whatever, but there's a very useful tool, and I apologize because I can tell you about it as I have here, but I was hoping to show you. If you go into GSA eLibrary, in the middle, near the top, there's a search function. You would normally type in something. Right below that, you're going to find, and I don't know how many of you have ever used this, it's called a cross-SIN search. So you have a multiple requirement. And you want to find out which contractors under this PSS craziness provide these multiple services. That cross function will allow you to type in the SINs and cross them over to 00 Corp, and it'll show you specifically the contractors that all offer multiple services. And again, if you want to stop by, any one of us can show you, be happy to share that with you, because I have discovered not a lot of people knew that that tool existed, and maybe because there was never really a need because you didn't have consolidation. But as we're moving to category management, you know, we've got some of our other acquisition centers. They don't have as many programs as us, but they're doing the same thing. They're starting to look at what is really the most beneficial for our customer to begin with, and our industry partner, because we want it to truly be a win-win. And obviously, where we can save money in doing business with our industry partner, that means it's saving money for us as taxpayers, right? And that's really our ultimate goal. With the consolidation, in the past, you would see standardized contract numbers. You would become very familiar with your contractor's contract number. I know SAIC had 10F blah, 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 and it went to their MOBIS. They no longer have that. They now have a GS00F. Why? Because they were a company, and you're going to find this with a lot of, primarily your large firms, Booz Allen, Northrop Grumman. They had multiple contracts, and we had to drive them into one contract number, so they now have 00F. But all these numbers you see, when the schedules were first created in the early 90s, the intent was whoever owned, whatever region owned that schedule, that would be the contract identifier. So like in Auburn, we created the environmental schedule, so all the environmental contracts are 10F. Log World, 10F. But we also inherited schedules because as GSA, FAS started restructuring and they started moving programs around, MOBIS did not begin in Auburn. It began in our central office, DC office, so it had 23F. So it's all over the board. And then we started sharing with our colleagues in New York who are 02F. But it's okay, it's all PSS. But it's a question I get asked is, how do I know they're PSS contract holders? You're going to know by their identification of their program code themselves. It's PSS 00 Corp. So I just throw this in here because it is a very common question I get. So another one is, well, now that you've consolidated, can you still use CTAs? Of course. If you establish CTAs in your RFQ, of course the companies can still participate in a contractor teaming arrangement. They can still do prime sub. None of that's changed. All we've done in essence is change their contract number. Contractors who held more than one contract, when we consolidated them, they got a new period of performance. We had to do that because, again, I'll just use SAIC. Maybe they had their MOBIS contract when MOBIS first came out and it was getting ready to expire, the 20-year relationship. And then they had an environmental 10 years later or whatever. We had to bring it all together, but their pricing and their terms and conditions, none of that changed. None of that changed. So I explained a little bit what happened when a company had more than one that was affected. As I said, we transitioned or we migrated. And we did that so we could get them to one contract number. Now, agencies, when I've done agency training, the first thing they'll say is, well, wait a second. We were dealing with some of those companies that had more than one. How am I going to know? And how do I find them? Because you've now rocked my world, GSA. Where do I go? Well, we've got a couple of different tools. First of all, anybody that migrated, they have a GS00F contract number. That's the first indicator. The second is we have a matrix on our portal page. If you go to resources for customers, you'll find there's a matrix there, and it identifies every contract that was migrated. It will show the firm, for instance, using SAIC, it will show the company, it will show their individual contract numbers that they used to have, and it will show the new contract number that now governs those services. Again, keeping in mind, no change to terms and conditions, no changes to pricing, okay? And then, of course, Advantage. As our contract operation division worked through the migration, and I have to tell you guys, this started out as a team of 7, and they made a tremendous effort and got through a substantial amount of these contracts. But as we were getting closer to the wire, we had to bring in more people. They did an outstanding job, and they had the foresight to go in and realize, you know, another way we can help our customers is the Advantage file, because customers aren't always going to necessarily know to look for our new PSS portal page. They're going to still try to find MOBIS. You know, how can we give them as much information? So they were instructing all of the firms who were required to consolidate to put a statement in their Advantage file that would show this was our service, this was our old contract, so that you would be able to identify, because we do have a lot of customers that rely on contract numbers for identification of firms that they've been dealing with. So you have 3 different methods to identify if a firm really had multiple contracts, or was he just a single contract holder in one program and nothing happened. In the end, no terms and conditions were changed and no pricing was changed. Everything remained the same. Do we have contractors that did not transition? We did. We did have some firms, and there are still a couple out there that are pending. And it was due to the fact that we had to identify BPAs. When we started this transition process, we asked industry to provide us their list of firms. That's a territory that's held close to them. They don't always like to share that. And that was one of the selling features of GSA and the Schedules program to begin with. When the schedules were created, the concept was we create the vehicle. It allows you to deal directly with industry. You don't have to come through GSA. You don't have to give us anything. You go directly to them. It's well and good until somebody gets an idea like this. And then it kind of goes, okay, that was not such a good idea, because we don't really know who the customers are to reach out to them directly. So we relied heavily on our industry partners to provide us that information and to help us market what was happening. And then through that, we conducted training. Our very first customer was our AMCOM customers, our #1 customer, our largest customer right here. And we came out and we met with them in January. They were on board, and then they ended up serving as our poster child as we went on to meet with other agencies on how to help them overcome the fear, because it was. I mean, you are just literally changing. You know, we've got BPAs, we've got task orders. What are you doing to us? You know, I mean, we just started using you GSA, and now you're doing this to us. There was a lot of communication, and there continues to be a lot of communication today to help you understand how the schedule works. It's no different. It's still an MAS schedule. It's still there for you to use. Same contractors, same quality service. All we've done is shift them into under one umbrella. I apologize. A big one is, how did that migration affect the task orders and the BPAs? And that's still an ongoing training effort that we have out there for our customer agencies. With respect to task orders, it didn't impact you at all, because you can place a task order up to the very last day of a contract. So any task orders that were in effect at the time of transition until that cutoff date happened on that old contract, those orders continued on, and the clause that governed it was 52-1622. Not an issue. Where it became a little stickier was the BPAs. We gave our customers a couple of options. They could either transition with us. That was our preferred method. And we even went so far as to work with our council to create documents, whether it was a JNA, a memo to the file, a DNF, whatever an agency needed, we vetted through our council to ensure that we were not misleading anyone, because the key point to remember was what was happening on those contracts, nothing more than we were changing a contract identifier, which is not a term of the contract itself. It's simply an identifier. It impacted no change to terms and conditions of the contractual document itself and the period of performance. The burden lied with the contractor on the period of performance, because in most cases we were asking them, we were giving them this new potential 20-year relationship, but they were not allowed to change anything. And for a contractor who was coming up in the last couple of years of their 20-year relationship on MOBIS, being it's the oldest program and the most well-known and used, yeah, it was a risk. But they saw the value in elimination of multiple schedules, because remember, for them it's saving them money and time because they don't have multiple people managing all these different programs, different period of performances, different different PCOs. How do I do this? How do I do that? Now it's all housed under one. And so that was our first, is that we would sit down and work with agencies. Would you be willing to transfer your BPAs? I don't know the exact number, but we got quite a few that were able to do so. The other was to leave it in place, and we would just leave the single contract alone, and we would not touch your BPA relationship, but it encompassed you talking to us to let us know. So we would be able to modify that contract, allowing that contractor to retain that contract solely for the purpose of your BPA relationships. Any new work they had would have to go under their new migrated 00F contract. Both methods are in play today. Both methods are working great, and we've had absolutely no problem. If you're an agency out there who's going, I think we had a BPA, I think we've got one, and this is the first I'm hearing, it's important you come up and chat with us. I've got the person who was really instrumental in overseeing the actual contracting function, Kim McFall. Kim, why don't you stand up real quick? She was the manager that oversaw the team, the acquisition team itself, who did the work. We definitely want to talk to you to ensure we're not disrupting your relationship. Again, I've talked about this, where you can find the list of firms. And here we now have a new PSS migration champion, Lisa Norgren. Take advantage of Kim while she's here today. She just got a promotion to another job. She's no longer going to be in acquisition. Either person is very well versed in contracting. They've been with our organization a very long time, and they know the schedules program quite well. So both are here to help you. I think I've gone over the benefits. Obviously, it's to create a single source for you, our customer, making it easier. Not only to find the services, but then to secure the services. And I'm not going to go into this. This is the detailed, this is the government answer of what are the benefits for you. It's going to, the intent is to make your life easier, quite frankly, whether it's buying just a particular service or a multitude of services that are now housed under one umbrella. Again, these are our sites. I encourage you, I don't know how many of you follow Interact. If you're not an Interact member, not only for the professional services, but for any of our programs, it's an excellent tool. This is where we post our training. This is where we post changes. We also post them on our portal pages, but our portal page is limited to PSS, whereas Interact talks about all of our programs within Federal Acquisition Service. I definitely encourage you to become a member. If you have general questions, I put my phone number down, but I have to tell you all, if you go to the professional services at gsa.gov, you're going to get me. If you go to the National Customer Service Center, you're going to get me. So I just put my number up there so you can call me direct, and you know who you're talking to. If you have specific questions about a contract, I encourage you to start with the contract specialist at GSA. You find that person by going to eLibrary. It will identify who the PCO that awarded or is managing that contract. If you don't get a hold of them, of course, you're always welcome to contact me.